measures that in New York City lasted a year and a half. It resulted in economic loss for parents, emotional and developmental harms to communities, and of course, at a great loss for our young people. New York City prohibited students, even after the schools reopened, from participating in sports and extracurricular activities. They even went so far as to mask preschool kids for extended periods of time. But in terms of the loss in social emotional difficulties, we saw that suicide rates sharply increased, the rate of BMI and increased weight gain among children doubled. New cases of type 2 diabetes among children nearly tripled. Others were set back months, even years in their development. Now New York is lowering standards for standardized test scores in reading and math following 2022, where less than 50% passed their reading exam and 30% passed their math exam. We also know that these policies were directly influenced by powerful groups like the American Federation of Teachers, to keep schools closed and made it nearly impossible to keep them open, even with all the resources that had been provided to them by Congress. As a matter of fact, the inflationary American Rescue Plan, which the Democrats passed in March of 2021 with their one-party rule, it was billed as a necessity for reopening schools during after the COVID-19 pandemic. They decided to spend this money despite $1 trillion sitting there unused for the previous packages. This ARA provided another $122 billion for elementary and secondary schools. It was so critical. They needed this money. They could not open the schools without it. Guess what? As of November, only 15% of that money has been spent. They then created another fund, additional $5.5 billion in relief funds for private schools with low-income students severely impacted by the pandemic. And we know, though, there was a clause in there, of course, so the governors, including one like mine, could raid that money and use it for all sorts of different purposes. So to date, out of that pot, $157 million has already been diverted to pay for other programs. Currently, $736 million has yet to been allocated to the private schools, and it is risk, again, of being raided by the governors. In total, $190 billion was allocated to aid schools across the country since 2020. And instead of using that funding for its original intent, we see states like New York spending it on all sorts of stuff, right? New York City allocated $12 million to go for restorative justice programs. They did implicit bias, anti-racism training. New York State Ed decided to put more money in diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. I don't know what that stuff has to do with COVID. I'm not sure what it has to do with reopening our schools either. So I guess my first question is, knowing what we know now and what we learned during the pandemic, specifically about how the virus posed such a low risk to children, was it necessary that excessive $190 billion in spending to reopen schools? Yes or no? Go down the line.
No, sorry.
CARES Act was understandable in March of 2020. That's just now being spent down 3 years later. So the subsequent two bills, no.
Just say a yes or no. Okay. I gave examples of what New York did. Would anyone like to comment on any awareness that they have of what other states may have done with that money?
We definitely have heard too many examples of the funds being expended on athletic endeavors and infrastructure. The funds were flexible. This isn't illegal or fraudulent that the districts and states are directing the funds to these endeavors, but it obviously reveals their priorities. We're dealing with a once in a lifetime academic crisis. We need to be shouting from the rooftops that the funds need to be focused on academic recovery. You all put in the requirements that 20% needed to be going to academic recovery, and that's being done at a minimum.
All right, I'm running out of time here. One last question. Should the federal government audit that money to find out where it went? Yes or no?
Yes, definitely.
And should the states be
Yes.
forced to repay that money if it's unspent still?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for your time.